Bergen-Belsen after liberation, how justice was decided. When British forces entered a concentration camp in northern Germany in April 1945, they encountered a scene that would permanently alter the world's understanding of state-organized cruelty. What they found was not merely the aftermath of war, but the evidence of a system deliberately engineered to erase human dignity on an industrial scale. The liberation of Bergen-Belsen did more than expose suffering. It posed a question that echoed far beyond the barbed wire. How should justice be delivered after crimes so vast that language itself struggles to contain them? This story is not only about what happened inside the camp. It is about what followed. The confrontation between law and atrocity, between vengeance and accountability. It is about ordinary individuals who became agents of an extraordinary system, and a world forced to decide whether justice could exist without becoming cruelty itself. April 15, 1945, marked a turning point not only in the war, but in human history. British troops approaching Bergen-Belsen believed they were entering a routine military site. Instead, they walked into a reality that defied comprehension. The camp held tens of thousands of prisoners in catastrophic conditions, many barely alive, many already gone. Disease, starvation, and neglect had been allowed to spread unchecked, not by accident, but by design. What distinguished Bergen-Belsen from battlefield destruction was intent. This was not collateral damage. It was the predictable outcome of a system that had abandoned moral restraint in favor of ideology and obedience. The individuals running the camp were not distant figures hidden behind bureaucracy. They were present, identifiable, and in positions of authority. At the top stood the camp commandant, a man whose career reflected a dangerous form of normality. He was not known for emotional outbursts or theatrical cruelty. Instead, he exemplified administrative indifference. Human beings were reduced to figures in reports, logistics problems to be managed, lives treated as expendable variables. Under his leadership, conditions deteriorated steadily, even as resources that could have alleviated suffering were withheld. Alongside him were guards, both men and women, whose roles shattered the comforting myth that evil always looks monstrous. Some were young, some were trained professionals, others were administrators. Each occupied a specific function within the camp's hierarchy, and each made daily decisions that reinforced a system of total control. Testimonies later revealed patterns of discipline enforced through fear, routine punishment, and selective enforcement designed to break resistance. One of the most unsettling aspects of Bergen-Belsen was the presence of medical personnel who had abandoned the foundational principles of their profession. Instead of healing, medical authority was repurposed to assess usefulness, determine survival prospects, and legitimize neglect. The language of medicine was stripped of compassion and transformed into a tool of classification. Suffering became data. Death became procedure. Female guards played visible roles in enforcing this order, challenging assumptions about gender and violence. Some exercised power through rigid enforcement of rules, others through intimidation. Their actions demonstrated how ideology, once internalized, can override empathy, regardless of background. Survivors later recalled not only physical hardship, but the psychological toll of living under constant arbitrariness, never knowing which rule would be enforced or by whom. When liberation came, it did not bring instant clarity. The British forces faced an overwhelming humanitarian emergency. Disease continued to claim lives even after the gates were opened. In this chaos, raw emotions surfaced. Some former prisoners, having endured prolonged abuse, sought immediate retribution against those who had oppressed them. These moments exposed a painful truth. Liberation does not automatically heal trauma, nor does it immediately restore trust in law. Recognizing this danger, Allied commanders made a critical decision. They chose restraint. Captured camp personnel were removed from the general population and placed under military custody. This choice was controversial and deeply emotional, but it reflected a commitment to something fragile and unprecedented, the idea that justice must be deliberate, not reactive. That commitment took form in the war crimes trials that followed. Held later in 1945, these proceedings represented one of the first serious attempts to apply legal standards to crimes of such scale. The court faced challenges never before encountered. How does one assign responsibility within a system designed to diffuse it? How do individual actions matter when atrocities are systemic? Prosecutors focused on evidence and testimony. Survivors described daily conditions, specific acts, and identifiable perpetrators. Visual documentation from the camp was introduced, not to shock, but to establish truth. The defense often relied on a familiar argument: obedience. Orders, they claimed, left no room for choice. The tribunal rejected this reasoning. A foundational principle emerged: following orders does not absolve moral responsibility when those orders violate fundamental human rights. This was not merely a legal conclusion, but a moral declaration. It asserted that individuals retain agency, even within authoritarian systems. Verdicts reflected varying degrees of responsibility. Some defendants received severe sentences due to their leadership roles and direct involvement. Others received long imprisonment. A number were acquitted due to insufficient evidence. These outcomes underscored that the trials were not symbolic rituals, but genuine judicial proceedings. The executions that followed were conducted under strict legal protocols. They were not public spectacles, nor expressions of vengeance. They were the conclusion of a process meant to affirm that law, not chaos, would define the post-war order. Whether these sentences brought closure remains debated, but their significance was unmistakable. Bergen-Belsen left behind more than ruins. It left questions that remain unresolved. How do ordinary people become participants in systems of mass harm? How does professional skill become detached from ethical responsibility? And how can societies prevent obedience from eclipsing conscience? These questions extend far beyond one camp or one era. They speak to modern institutions, to corporate systems, to governments, and to individuals navigating authority today. The trials established precedents that shaped international law, but laws alone are insufficient. They require moral vigilance to remain meaningful. The legacy of Bergen-Belsen is not confined to history books or memorials. It lives in the principles forged in its aftermath. The insistence that accountability must replace silence, and that justice must resist becoming cruelty in disguise. The trials that followed did not undo the suffering endured within the camp's fences, but they established something fragile and essential: a refusal to let atrocity pass without answer. They affirmed that individuals, regardless of rank or role, are responsible for the choices they make. In a world where systems still tempt people to surrender conscience for compliance, the lessons of Bergen-Belsen remain urgent. Justice is not automatic. It must be chosen, defended, and upheld, especially when doing so is most difficult. History's warning is clear: the absence of moral courage allows systems of harm to flourish. Remembering Bergen-Belsen is not only about honoring victims, it is about recognizing our responsibility in the present.